Welcome everybody to this session where we will be introducing you to your first own recipe. We will be going through the basics of creating your own recipe. This means that the ingredients as well as all of the other steps that come in the process will be explained. This goes for the brewing process but also the fermentation process. So what you are seeing now is the brewery portal. The brewery portal has three topics that you can choose from. One is the brewery overview, which you can see on the left side. One is the My Beer section, which is in the middle. This is the one that we will be using today. And there's one more, the community, which you can share your recipes in or copy recipes from other mini brewers. The first step in creating your own beer is going to the new beer section. You have to name your beer. I want to make an American IPA today, so let's call it the American IPA MiniBrew user session. The style is also very important. If you pick a style here, you will automatically get a guideline in the recipe creation process. So if you pick the wrong style here, it means that you will get the wrong guideline. So that's why we are going for the American IPA. Save. As you can see, we have a beer profile with no digits yet, no values. These values will change as soon as we will give input into the recipe. Next to this guideline of the beer profile, also a chart will show up on the left side of your screen where you can see the guidelines with proper margins in which you have to be to get to the desired style of beer. Moving on to the first part of creating your own recipe is the fact that you have to make sure your malt is milled in the correct size. When milling your malt, the malt gets broken down in specific particles, and if these particles are not in the correct size, the filtration ability of your meshing process will not be good. This can result in a very poor efficiency, so a lower potential alcohol volume in your beer, but also it can clog your system, ruining a brew. So it is very important that you make sure this is actually met between the 0.7 and 1 millimeter gap between the two roller mill. Moving down. You can always write down notes during the brewing, but also leave some notes for other people if you decide to share your recipe. People will, of course, see the public notes one, and the private notes will only be for you. Next, the brewing water. The brewing water is a very important part of the brewing process because the amount of water you will put in reflects the amount of beer you will get out of the system in the end. The calculation tool automatically calculates an end volume of 5.5 liters of beer. So this means that if you add an X amount of malt, the system will automatically calculate how much water you have to add to still get to this desired 5.5 liter mark. The first thing of your own recipe will be the meshing process. In the meshing process, you have to add fermentable ingredients. Fermentable ingredients are malt, sugar, malt extract, basically anything that has starch in there or sugar that can be fermented by yeast. The maximum amount of malt that you can add in one single meshing process is 2.3 kilograms. The minimum amount is 1.2 kilograms. You have to make sure that you are between these margins, otherwise the system may not be reflecting the correct efficiency and other values that are calculated by this tool. That is why it's very important to stay between these guidelines. When we are looking at an American IPA, we are always working with pale ale malt. Pale ale malt is a base malt that is used for a variety of beers, but especially pale ales, of which the American is one, the American Pale Ale. we are going to select a malt. It is possible to select a malt from our own database, but you can also create your own malt by scrolling down, going to the Add Ingredient button, and fill in the exact data of that specific malt or ingredient. These details you can get from your malt provider, and they have everything you need. The things that you, for example, have to take into consideration. So we are making a pale ale malt trial. It's a grain. It's not an extract. It's a grain that we are going to use. So that's why I'm selecting grain. Requires meshing. Yes. Dry yield. This basically means how much of the sugar we can actually extract from this type of grain. Usually it's between 75 and 80% for these kind of malts, the pale ale malt. So that's why I'm in between the middle a little bit. The moisture. Usually these malts have around 5% moisture. Again, this is a value that you can get from your local supplier. Now I save the fermentable and I have a new ingredient in my database. I have to fill in a random number here. So let's start with the minimum amount. As you can see, a guideline has popped up on the left side of your screen. And this means that we can now finally start tweaking our recipe to make sure that we are within these boundaries. As you can see, we have SRM. This is a unit that reflects the color of your beer. Americans may know it as degrees Lovibond. European may know it as EBC units. But online you can find an easy conversion tool to make sure that you're working with the correct unit. ABV reflects the alcohol percentage of the beer. IBU reflects the bitterness of the beer. The OG will reflect the amount of sugar that has been extracted during the meshing and boiling phase, and what you will end up with before fermentation. The FG is the total amount after fermentation. So when the beer has finished fermentation and no more fermentation will take place. So going back to the meshing process and the malt, as you can see, I added 1200 grams and the OG has risen a little, but it's still not within the correct boundary. I'm going to add 200 grams extra. I'm still not there. And then another 200 grams, and I'm almost there. Let's go for 100 grams more. Oh, accidentally. And we're very close. So, since I'm not going to change anything about this malt anymore, because I also want to use other malts, we will end up eventually in this boundary. So that's good. I have to remember to fill in the SRM as well, like I mentioned, because otherwise the color will not be calculated correctly. The EBC of this malt is around 3 to 4 SRM. So I've just added this number and you can see the color has actually changed and it's now within the boundaries for this recipe, which is great. The pale ale malt, in this instance, is mostly used for the fermentability of your beer. So it has a lot of fermentable sugars in there that the yeast can use to produce alcohol and other flavors. But it does not contribute as much to the mouthfeel and body of a beer. So we're also going to use a different ingredient called oat flakes. These flakes are basically oats that have been gone through a different process than the malting process, and they will mostly contribute to the body and mouthfeel of the product and not actually contributing much to the OG. Typically, you use around 200 grams in total of the total volume of your malt bill to make sure it's within a good percentage of each other. As you can see, I'm still a little bit under the boundary that we set, so I'm going to increase it by just a little. I want still a light alcohol beer, but I want to be within the boundary. and still not there, and I'm almost there. Pale malt. So I'm on the lower side, but it's okay. And it means I've also increased the color a little bit because I've added more malt, obviously. Moving on to the meshing scheme. During the meshing, the system will heat up to a specific temperature to make sure that the enzymes that break down the starch into sugars can work in the most optimal way. You have an enzyme called alpha amylase and an enzyme called beta amylase. They are the most important enzymes when meshing malt. The first step that we will be doing is the 62-degree step. During this step, the amylase is active that will break down the starch into fermentable sugars. So this means that if I will be fermenting on a long time on this step, that I will be able to get the most potential of alcohol level that I want, because a lot of the sugars are fermentable by the yeast. However, I do not want this for this case because I want a balanced beer with some body as well. So I want to do a 62-degree step for only 20 minutes. So I want a moderate fermentability. If you want to know what kind of meshing scheme you should use for specific beer styles, you can check out our help center to find schemes for your desired style. So the 62-degree step for the fermentable sugars is done. What you also see very often is that there is a single mesh. And that means that 66 degrees is a step where both enzymes are active. So people typically use 66 degrees for 1 hour, and then almost all of the starch has been converted to those sugars, like I mentioned. This step we'll be doing only for 10 minutes because, like I said, we want not too much fermentable sugars, only a little bit. Going for the body, this happens usually around the 72-degree mark. The duration will be around 20 minutes again, maybe 15 even. We don't need that much because we have also been using this enzyme already at the 66-degree step to make sure that we get some body in the beer as well. Finally, we have to add a 78-degree step. The reason why is at the 78-degree step, almost all of the enzymes are deactivated. That means that if you are meshing and you are happy with your OG that you have achieved, it means that you will be able to actually stop the process and that this OG is not increasing anymore. That's why it's always important to add this step at every meshing scheme that you will make. So that's the meshing. Now we move on to the next part, the boiling. The boiling is primarily used for preservation of the beer, but also by extracting a lot of the bitterness that is inside the hops. These hops, they contain alpha acids, and those alpha acids will be changing to bitterness during the boiling process. The longer you boil, the more bitterness will be extracted. Typical boil times are around 60 minutes, but they usually range between 60 and 90 minutes. For this recipe, we will take the standard 60 minutes. Since we want some bitterness, because we want to increase to an IBU of minimum 40, we have to use some bittering hops. But IPAs usually also have some fruitiness of and aroma of the hops as well. That means we also have to take some hop aromas into account. So we need to use hops at a different time in the boiling process to make sure we also extract flavor and not just bitterness. When selecting the ingredient, I'm going for a Columbus hop, a typical hop for bitterness. It has a very high alpha acid count, and that's why it's great for creating bitterness, as that's what we will gain most of it compared to actual flavors. We will be going for 10 gram, 60 minutes, so we will start at, this means it will boil for 60 minutes total. As you can see, the IBU increased a lot, so we're already in the boundary, so that is very good. So we don't have to worry about the bitterness anymore. I will add another hop because I want to use some of the fruitiness too, like I mentioned. I want this beer to be a little bit of a grapey kind of taste, so I will go for 10 grams with 0 minutes. As you can see, almost nothing happens with the IBU if I add a hop for 0 minutes of boiling. This means that the hops will not get any bitterness extracted if it's not really boiling, or at least at a very minimal rate. If you want to make a recipe with not just hops but also other spices or other ingredients, you can add an ingredient over here. Select if it's a fermentable product like sugar, for example, or if you want to go for an adjunct like orange peel. It's already in the database. You can simply add it, hook up a duration, and that's it. So this is it for the boiling. We are going to boil for 60 minutes. We have some hops for the bitterness and we have some hops for flavor. We move on to the fermentation, which is also a very important part because if we do not do this properly, we will not end up with the desired beer. When fermenting, there is a primary fermentation, there is a secondary fermentation, and there is a conditioning step. The primary fermentation is a fermentation process where the majority of the sugars that have been extracted during the meshing process will be converted to alcohol, flavor, and CO2, carbon dioxide. In the secondary process, mostly this is used for dry hopping, but also for already reducing the yeast activity, still making sure that some of the sugars are being converted, but not as much, and also creating more subtle flavors. At higher fermentation temperatures, the flavors that are created are more volatile, and that results in a more heavy and distinctive aroma or taste in the beer. If you ferment at a little bit lower temperature, you will get less of these volatile flavor compounds, which means that you have a bit more balanced beer. Sometimes with an IPA, you like an in-your-face hop flavor or other flavors or aromas. So then you will be fermenting a little bit higher, for example, or use a bit more dry hop. But yeah, it's very dependent on the recipe. The first thing that we have to do is selecting a yeast. There will be an article in the help center again to know what kind of yeast you have to select for your beer, because every yeast has a different beer style in mind. One yeast that is used for many of the beer styles that are available is the US-05 yeast by Seth Ale Fermentis. And usually these come in bags of around 10 to 11 grams. It is no problem to add the full bag, but you can also add only 5 grams of the bag of yeast. It doesn't really matter. I will go for the 11 grams, so the full bag. When fermenting, there is a difference between top fermenting beers and bottom fermenting beers. The top fermenting beers are beers that are fermenting at a higher temperature, and the bottom fermenting beers ferment at a lower temperature. A style that represents a bottom fermenting beer is a lager, for example, Pilsner. If you're top fermenting, you're usually talking about ales, such as an IPA or a triple, for example. We start at 21 degrees. You can find the temperatures at which the yeast can thrive at the back of your yeast package. 21 degrees is usually a temperature that a lot of yeast will thrive well in. So they can create a lot of the alcohol that is needed for the beer preservation and flavor, of course. We will be doing that for 4 days. Usually the most conversions of the sugar to alcohol already happen in the first 2 to 3 days, but I usually like to add a day extra to make sure that the conversions have stopped, or at least they have become so low that we can move on to the next step. Meanwhile, I will add a conditioning step and a secondary step in the process. So we have a conditioning step. Conditioning means, in this case, that we will be conditioning the beer to a specific temperature, and after every conditioning step, you will be asked to perform a trip removal. So I use this conditioning step simply as a way to force myself to remove the trip. So after the 4 days have expired of the primary fermentation, we will continue at the same temperature for 0 days. So that means that it will immediately ask us to remove the trip after the primary fermentation has finished. Then moving on to the secondary. This happens at lower temperatures, like I explained before, for creating a little bit less of the volatile aroma compounds, but a bit more of the balanced ones. So we will be fermenting around 14 degrees, and we will be doing that for around 4 days as well. Since we are making an IPA, I would like to add some dry hop to this step. So I scroll down and I add some dry hop. I will be using some Amarillo hops, and it depends on the style you're making, but our recipe packs, they all contain between 20 to 40 grams of dry hop. That's usually an amount that's used, but it's very dependent on what you desire, because other people like a bit more aroma and that in your face kind of hop flavor. Other people want to be a bit more subtle. We will go to the lower end, so we will only use 20 grams of hops. We have to select in which step we add it. Secondary, I want the dry hop to be added, and I want to dry hop for 4 days. I will be moving up to the secondary. So after 4 days, at the beginning of the secondary, the hops will be added, and after 4 days, the process is over. Then we need to add conditioning steps, because if we do not add conditioning steps, the recipe will not be brewable, because we have to get rid of the dry hops that we just added. For every 10 gram of dry hop that we add, we have to perform one trip removal, so one extra conditioning stage. I will be going and cold crash the beer to 5 degrees to make sure we get as much sedimentation as possible. And we do that for 0 days again. So as soon as it has finished this secondary step, it will start cooling down to 5 degrees, and as soon as it hits the target, it will ask us for another trip removal. Then I go up, I add one more conditioning step. It will be shown at the bottom. As you can see, it has shifted a little bit, so take that into consideration, that sometimes these bars may shift, so make sure that they are in the correct order. This is no problem anyway, because I wanted this to last 0 days and also 5 degrees, so I will change this to 5 days. Now this means I have a complete recipe. With the color, I'm within the range. With the alcohol, I'm within the range. The IBU, so the bitterness. The OG, I'm exactly in the range. So 1056 here. 1056 here is also the minimum. The FG is also met, so that's also great. And I'm ready to save the beer. If the beer would not be brewable, this tag would not show up, and it would instead give you a message of what you have to change to actually make sure you have a recipe that is brewable for the MiniBrew. If you ever have questions about what kind of recipe you want to make and you're not sure, you can always plan in a session with the MiniBrew Help Center and agents to make sure that you have a successful brew. We also have, of course, a community on the Facebook page where a lot of people share their interests and recipes. And it's also possible to check out this community for all the amazing beers that they have made. All I have to do is go to one of the recipes, I press a clone button, and it will show up in my beer overview. They will have exactly the ingredients that you need to source. They already have the pre-made meshing scheme, boiling scheme, and everything else that's needed. So yeah, that's a first step of making your own recipe. In later sessions, we will be talking about more advanced topics, but also a style by style review of beers and how to make them. Thank you for your time, and you know where to find us on the Help Center.